At the age of 35, because I sensed God wanted me to do something more with my life, and for the last 29 years, I primarily mentored men.
Oh, you were doing what at the time that God called you to do this?
Yeah, I owned a manufacturing company in Grand Rapids.
Okay.
And I was just a young businessman and just going for it, and God radically changed my life when I was about 31 years old.
How did that happen?
Well, I was raised in a great family. In fact, I tell people, a great Christian family. I tell people that the only gripe I have with my parents is I can't blame my dysfunctions on them. They were amazing people, but I grew up in Christian schools, Christian churches all of my life. I knew all kinds of things about God, but I didn't really love God, and I didn't serve God, and I didn't want him to be the center of my life. My God was really success. And so I threw myself into beginning a business or taking over a small business, and we grew at age 31. I had 175 people and Mercedes in the garage, and life was good, and I didn't really need God. I went to church twice on Sunday and believed the Bible to be true, believed Jesus to be the Son of God. But then I found out I had cancer, lymphoma cancer, been given 5 years to live.
When you were 32?
32, and actually 31, and God used that to get my attention, and I really did not want to be surrendered to Jesus. I tried to find every way I could to find plan B, a less intrusive way to follow Jesus, and I couldn't. And so finally one day I said, God, you take me, you do with me whatever you want, and he did. Eventually led me to selling my business, and so at age 35, I left. I took no work contract, and I said, God, what do you want me to do? So I didn't plan on doing what I'm doing this long, but it's been a great life. I'm happy. I tell people say, oh, that's so nice, Claire, that you do all these good things for people and you mentor people. And I said, you know what? I make a really good living, and I'm doing exactly what I want. There are people who sacrifice for Jesus. I'm just not one of them.
Claire, I do want to recommend your book, and I was talking to Tim here at the top of the show before you came on. Your opening chapter, your introduction is...
What's the title of the book?
The title of the book is called The 10-Second Rule, Following Jesus Made Simple. And of course now most of it is loaded with some great recommendations for Christians restructuring their lives. So this is not a book of fluff, but I want to say that your opening chapter was very funny. Almost Garrison Keillor-like. I mean, I just found myself laughing at the way, and I'm not, reading a book on air is bad radio, but this is just a very interesting way in which you describe your life prior to this, God renovating it. And I think it describes a lot of people in the church. Well, I'll tell you what, let me just read this one paragraph. It says, up until age 31, I was your standard issue Christian, the kind the Christian schools and churches in our conservative town pounded out year after year like spiritual Model Ts, mostly in one color, beige. And I just thought it was a perfect way of expressing the way we oftentimes produce cookie-cutter type Christians, but drained of the passion for Christ that you obviously found later in life.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm done.
Appreciate the interview, Claire, and maybe you have a good rest of your life. Okay.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Just the transformation that happened in your life originated, according to this book, and again, I do recommend the 10-Second Rule. It originated with you actually reading the Gospels. I'm not trying to, at this point, be funny, but you reading the Gospels and taking Jesus at his word seriously. But the life that you saw in the Gospels that Jesus calls disciples to was not the life you saw lived out in your church, in your family, even though your family, as you described, your parents were wonderful. These are good, godly people you grew up around, but their lives did not reflect, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did not seem to reflect the Gospels.
Well, let me just say this. Here's what happened. A pastor friend of mine, when I found out I had cancer, I went to him. Wasn't the pastor of my church. I went for a second opinion. And he said to me, how much time do you spend with God every day? And I really had to wrestle with, should I lie to a pastor? Well, I prayed for 10 minutes before I ate. And
whether or not to lie or not?
Yeah.
That'd be an interesting prayer. Lord, lead me.
Yeah. Oh, I'm kidding you. You know, I was in this control mode, and so he said to me, well, how much time do you spend reading the Bible every day? And I didn't. I had never read an entire book of the Bible all the way through. So he said, here's what I'd like you to do before we could do much further. Read the book of Matthew or read the book of Luke, and when you get done, call me. So I started reading a couple of chapters every day.
Because you had to call him.
And I didn't get into, I didn't get 10 chapters into Matthew before I came to this conclusion. What the kinds of people Jesus describes as his followers bore no relationship to me whatsoever. And so if that's really true, then I may not actually be a Christian. Now, I was raised in a Calvinist background that you almost, as I say later in the book, you had to either be an atheist or Democrat not to be a Christian. and so that was a watershed moment for me. What is wrong with this picture? How could I have been exposed to the gospel twice a day, Christian schools, Christian college, everything, and missed it? And the difference was this, that Jesus actually expected me to think and behave like him, to imitate him. And most of us like to think of ourselves. In fact, there's a question I ask in my book at the very last chapter. I ask this question: would the people who know you best consider you a Christian or a follower of Jesus? Now, people try to argue with me, well, what do you mean by that? I said, intuitively, I think we all know the difference. Now, I think all followers of Jesus are Christians, but not all Christians are followers of Jesus. So I like that question simply because it calls us up to think about, what really are we? And I was a Christian, but I was not a follower of Jesus. If I was a Christian, I'm not even sure of that.
Clare deGraaf is with us. His book is called The 10-Second Rule, Following Jesus Made Simple. How do you get a copy of this book?
Well, right now, it's going to be released by Simon & Schuster, Howard Books, on February 5. So you can pre-order it on Simon & Schuster's website and on Barnes & Noble. But it won't actually be out for about another month.
Okay. And Clare spells it, but your website is what?
Yes, the10secondrule.com, 10, the number's 10, not the word, the10secondrule.com. And you can go and get information about the book. You can download the first chapter. But we haven't actually talked about the rule is yet.
Right.
And the 10-second, pardon?
Go ahead. We want to know.
Yeah. Well, the 10-second rule is simply this. Just do the next thing you're reasonably certain Jesus wants you to do. And do it quickly before you change your mind. And I'll tell you how this came about. Actually, I was taught the 10-second rule by a Chinese pastor, but he said this to me, and I think it's true of you and of your listeners. Have you ever been driving and seen a car broken down by the side of the road and had this strong impression just to stop and help? And then almost immediately, these excuses begin. Clare, you don't have time for this. I mean, people are waiting for you at your next meeting. These people probably have a cell phone. They'll be fine. And by the time these excuses, I'm having this little duel in my mind, this dueling voices in my mind. By the time the excuses go away, the car is out of sight, and I'm on to my next meeting. Or I sit down at a computer, and you're about to go to some website that no Christian should, and you're about to send an email in anger. And almost immediately, we sense these voices, like the Holy Spirit is saying to us, warning us, don't. But then this other voice kind of whispers to us and says, hey, one more time won't kill you. They were wrong. You have a right to tell them. Or you wimped out sharing the gospel with a coworker because of fear and embarrassment. Most of you know what I'm talking about. I mean, most of us have heard or sensed these dueling voices in our heads or hearts, and far too often we just listen to this other voice. So how do we get better at actually obeying Jesus? And I found that procrastination is not my friend. So that's why the 10-second rule. Just do the next thing you're reasonably certain Jesus wants you to do, and do it immediately before you change your mind.
Claire, I want to ask you about that, about witnessing or sharing your faith. What do you do when the person maybe you don't know this person? I golf. I like to golf, and sometimes I go to the golf course, and when I'm out of town, and I just walk up and say, hey, here's my money, I want to play.
Yeah.
And they put you with somebody. You don't even know them.
Huh?
This happens often if golfers know what I'm talking about. So I always pray, Lord, hey, man, I'm going to be spending 4 hours with this guy.
Yeah.
And give me an opportunity to share. And sometimes it works. Sometimes the person's open and you get to talk to them. Occasionally they're a believer.
Yeah.
But occasionally you run into immediate resistance.
Yeah.
As in, okay, I'm going to talk to this, and it may not be that kind of situation. It may be somebody on an airplane.
Yeah.
People, or somebody you meet at a business function or something. You mentioned sharing with your coworker as an example, Claire. So we all have life experiences where we're with people that we have time to share. But what do you do in a situation, Claire, where the person is immediately defensive? They don't want to talk about religion or politics.
Right.
And if you continue to force the issue, you're going to get into an argument.
Yeah.
And so I've often wondered, at that situation, I usually back off, because I don't want to argue with this guy for 3 hours.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And he didn't want to argue with me. He didn't pay for that.
Plus, he's got a golf club in his hands.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be dangerous. But I mean, not just that situation, but I give that as an example of me personally. But what do you do when you meet people, or you get to know people, or you work with people, and they don't want to talk to you about those kinds of things?
Well,
but yet it's your responsibility as a Christian to share your faith. How much do you force feed people?
Yeah, I don't.
You don't?
No, I don't force feed people. I want them to remain, because they kind of expect us Christians to come down their throat. And so I like to be winsome. In fact, I tell people my 3 criteria for me is I want to be true to the Bible, intellectually honest, and gracious. And I think Christians can sometimes be shrill and obnoxious. And so usually when I have a situation like that and I've tried to do something and I failed, and we'll talk about that in just a second, I will often use I have a chapter in my book called Predecisions. And that is whenever we fail at one of these, if we sense God asks us to do something,
right,
and we do it, and we fail, then we ought to step back and think about, well, next time, what could I have done differently? Because a lot of us just kind of slither out of the room, or, we go on our way and we don't think about it, and we just think, well, that guy's not open. But maybe it's just simply the way that we presented it to them. We haven't really thought about what we would do next time differently that might have a different result. Have we actually taken the time even to pray for that person immediately when that happens? And so I think that while we could talk about evangelism at this point, what I'm primarily concerned with, any time I fail to be obedient to what I think Jesus is asking me to do, I ask myself, did I fail? Or it may be that, let me just say this. We Christians have gotten this funny notion that if we sense God calling us to do something and it doesn't work out, then that was a failure. Well, I don't know that that's true. I think there are times when God actually asks me to do something just simply to see if I'm willing to do it, and that whether I, in quotes, fail or have the guy be interested or not is immaterial to God, because he can cause anyone's heart to stir and to ask the right questions. So I usually begin a conversation with someone and just see once if they're interested at all. And if they're not, I will literally stop, back off, close my eyes sometimes, and just pray for them, and maybe re-engage a little bit more a few minutes later, because I believe that the Holy Spirit needs to prepare that person for me.
You know what most people think? I think most people, you deal in that situation, very, very few are just completely obstinate or rude